Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was entrusted with a legendary gift. When Naruto is given a gift considered legendary even in a world where walking on water is a daily occurrence for some, will it lead him on a path towards peace, or will the consequences of said gift leave a hole in his heart too large to fill? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 6, Wind Eye. The great sandstone walls of Sunagakure no Sato rose up high above the young monk, in stark contrast to the surrounding desert. He was quite thankful to finally arrive at the village, although calling it as such would be a stretch due to the sheer size of the ninja capital. The journey itself was not all that harrowing. Most of the time there was a breeze to stave off the worst of the sun's punishing rays, and at night Naruto was able to use the fire-natured chakra running through his body to warm himself. He remembered fondly when Chiriko had decided to test his and Sora's nature affinities. Sora's came up as wind, which was surprising due to the rarity of wind users outside of Kaze no Kuni. Of course, that paled in comparison to the surprise that Naruto was gifted with all 5 nature affinities in what looked like equal measures. A feat that was considered biologically impossible by all the chakra experts in the known world. The look on Chiriko's face as the small piece of paper simultaneously split into 4 pieces, burnt, crumpled, dampened and crumbled into dust was absolutely priceless. Being the easiest to control, Naruto first began training his fire affinity, taking to it surprisingly quickly. Not to be outdone, Sora began his own elemental training, although Naruto didn't get to see the fruits of that effort as they had each only begun a month before Naruto left. However, the blonde managed to surprise Chiriko when he politely declined being taught any fire jutsu. He didn't really have an answer when asked why, especially by Sora, who just seemed confused. He would have thought learning jutsu would be right up Naruto's alley. Honestly though, it simply reminded Naruto too much of what his life might have been in Konoha. Then of course that brought him to memories of the day he lost everything he cared about, and it was just too painful for the blonde. His Rinnegan abilities were different, they were just as much a part of him as the actual eyes were themselves. He felt obligated to learn and understand them better. Even so, he completed the first stage of fire manipulation training. He didn't even have to use shadow clones to do so, which he was proud of. The exercise involved setting a small fire in the middle of a leaf and controlling the flames so they wouldn't burn outwards. There was the added incentive that if you couldn't do it, you burned your fingers. Sora felt less obligated to do it the slow way. He used the useful jutsu in abundance to complete his own wind manipulation training, splitting a leaf. In the end, between Sora's use of shadow clones and Naruto's impeccable control over his chakra, they finished around the same time. Standing there now though, with the sun bearing down on him, and the enormous walls blocking a lot of the wind, ironically enough, fire-natured chakra wasn't all that helpful. He gave a small smile to the shinobi standing at the gate, who simply passed his rather bored gaze over the monk. Once he had deemed him simply a monk posing no immediate threat to Suna's safety, he handed Naruto a few forms to fill in. They were fairly standard liability forms, letting Naruto know that anything he did that was seen as wrong while in Suna would be punishable as the Kazekage, or more likely the shinobi on hand, deemed fit. Once they were all filled out, he was quickly ushered through with a group of merchants, a few of which were obviously not locals as they looked about ready to pass out from the heat. He felt especially sorry for a particularly large man wearing a lot of jewelry and finery that looked positively sweltering. Once he was in the village though, those thoughts left him as he gazed at the incredible sight. He had fond memories of Konoha mixed in with the bad, and he knew the village was a beautiful place to be. The forests surrounding the shinobi stronghold were lush and vibrant, as well as beautiful when they caught the light during a sunset. However, its beauty was incomparable to Suna's purely because the two places were so vastly different. Where Konoha had tall modern buildings nestled amongst more traditional estates, giving it a very multicultural appeal, Suna was slightly more uniform. All the buildings were built from the same material, a kind of multi-purpose sandstone that looked as solid as any good concrete or stone. However, that was where the uniformity ended. Each building looked as unique as it possibly could, most being either cylindrical or even spherical. Great walkways rose from the ground to straddle the sky, providing even more ways for civilians to get around the village. Yet there was something both villages both shared, and that was the vibrancy. People bustled through the streets, vendors peddled their wares to passers-by, and everywhere he looked shinobi were going about their business or relaxing in various cafes and restaurants, obviously between missions or training. It brought a smile to the young monk's face that even hundreds of miles away these people were still recognizable as just that, people. No matter where they lived, they were all still human with the same needs, desires and wants that came with it. It was comforting. Of course, humans were also rude, as quickly evidenced by an impatient merchant jostling Naruto as he hurried by, forcing the young monk to steady himself with the shikuju. Ignoring the man, Naruto took to wandering the village for a while, taking in the sights of the vibrant and friendly people. He was not used to the slight inclinations of the head and occasional wave that were tossed his way as people passed him by. He wasn't sure if it was because he was dressed as a monk or because the people were just naturally this friendly. It was a stark contrast to his treatment in Konoha, where he might as well have not existed. After a while, though, he began to grow hungry, so he stopped in what looked like a small park. There were swings and slides and other equipment associated with children, yet strangely there seemed to be nobody about. He took out a sealing scroll from one of his pockets, unsealing the box inside. Absently he noted he was running out of the rations Chiriko had given him at the start of his journey. He had put them to good use during his trek through the desert, although finding drinkable water was a whole other issue. He briefly wondered what he was supposed to do for money now that he was outside of the temple. In Konoha he had received a weekly stipend from the Hokage after leaving the orphanage. It wasn't a lot, and he tended to be overcharged or refused service in most places, but it was enough to get by. He guessed he would have to do jobs for people to earn food or money once his ran out. With shadow clones and chakra-enhanced muscles, he could be an excellent laborer. He wouldn't even be asking for much. He decided to think on it later as he noticed the doors to a large building across the park open, and a rush of young children maybe a year or two younger than him run out. He realized with a slightly raised brow that this must be Suna's Shinobi Academy, as he saw a few shuriken and kunai holsters on the young students, probably blunted. He watched with amusement as the kids began to play in the park during what was obviously a recess from their studies. He sighed though as he realized he too would be doing this had he stayed in Konoha. As he watched the children naturally congregate into their various friend groups, he wondered what kind of friends he might have had, if any. He didn't miss the casual glances he was getting from the nearby Chunin instructor, but those quickly stopped when Naruto made no move to do anything. Eventually he got up, broken from his melancholy, as the children were ushered back inside by a loud bell that obviously marked their break as over. He walked past the front of the academy, intent on finding somewhere he could get some food or work. However, he paused as he heard rather heated voices coming from a small alleyway that ran around the back of the school. Quieting the jingle of his shikuju with a thin application of chakra through the staff, he calmly walked towards the voices, surprised to find 3 boys that were probably last-year academy students all surrounding a younger girl who seemed to be from the year he had just seen playing outside. None of them seemed to notice him, and he didn't bother hiding himself, just leaning on the wall of the alley as he listened in with interest. "Please, I have to get back to class or sensei will be angry with me." It was the girl who spoke. She had brown hair that hung straight around her head down to her shoulders. Her voice was timid and full of fear as he bowed her head submissively to the 3 older boys. "What's the point, huh? It's not like somebody like you could ever be a shinobi." Naruto raised an eyebrow at that. The boy had a contemptuous sneer that the blonde recognized growing up. "Yeah, what kind of ninja is afraid of weapons anyway?" As if to emphasize his point, one of the others pulled a kunai out of his pouch, except these weren't the standard blunted weapon used from practice. This one gleamed in the weak light, the edges very much sharp and deadly. The effect on the girl was instantaneous. She tried to back away from the boy with the kunai, but was blocked by the other 2. Naruto was simply appalled by this. Was this how shinobi of the same village treated their own? "Maybe we should correct your little fear of weapons with a demonstration, eh?" Let us show you just how effective they can be. Suddenly the girl was grabbed from behind in a strong hold, one arm thrust out in front of her as the boy walked closer, kunai glinting ominously. However, before the sharp edge could be applied to her skin, the small weapon suddenly flew from his hands as if drawn by some invisible force. When the three turned in the direction it had flown, they saw Naruto standing there, the kunai in his hand as he observed it idly. Did you know the kunai used to be a gardening tool? They were used in royal gardens and monks' temples alike, a wonderful multi-purpose tool used for levering and digging. It was the ninja who turned it into a weapon, cheap to make and simple to sharpen. Suddenly a simple item used for gardening had been turned into a weapon designed to kill. Naruto looked up as he began to bend the kunai in his hands, using chakra to enhance his strength. Hey, who the hell are you? The tallest of the three boys stepped forward to face the newcomer, obviously either the leader of the trio or the resident hothead. Naruto simply chuckled as he let the kunai drop to the sandy ground, the weapon bent out of any kind of useful shape. Me? I'm just a simple traveling monk. The boy sneered, the earlier impossible feat forgotten as he immediately dismissed the boy smaller than he was. You're just a runt, get lost. We're fifth-year academy students, practically genin already. Naruto sighed in an exaggerated manner, taking the opportunity to rest his staff against the wall of the alleyway. I weep for your village the day people like you are legally allowed to become shinobi. The boy growled angrily, affronted that some brat kid would speak to him like that. He immediately drew out a second kunai as Naruto dropped back into a taijutsu stance none of them recognized. The almost genin stopped for a moment before laughing at the blonde. You're going to try and fight me? You're just a monk, I don't even recognize that stupid stance. Naruto allowed a fleeting smile to flicker over his lips that slightly unnerved the boy still holding the girl. This is the starter stance for the Mizu no Mai. I'm not surprised you don't recognize it, I'm still developing it after all. As he spoke his head lowered and brought his arms up, one in front of his body, and one behind so that it looked like his whole body was slightly tilted forwards. Both his palms were facing upwards and his legs were also spaced out in front and behind. In all it almost looked like he was bowing. It should be enough to show you that a weapon certainly does not make one a shinobi. As if that was some kind of signal, the other boy rushed forwards, bringing the kunai down in a high arc. Naruto waited until the last moment, his eyes still closed before suddenly moving out of the way. His whole body span, so close to the other boy they could have held a piece of paper between them. As he did, one hand grabbed a hold of the wrist holding the kunai before sliding under the boy, still in one clean sweeping motion. Continuing the flow of his strangely hypnotizing dance, he pulled his body into the splits, simultaneously taking out both of the boy's feet from under him. Instead of falling flat on his face though, Naruto almost gently rolled the boy to the ground so that his back was to the ground. Throughout the whole maneuver he had never let go of the boy's wrist. He backed off, allowing the boy to stand, which he did, getting to his feet with a surprised expression that quickly hardened into a scowl. What kind of pathetic move was that? It didn't even hurt. If that's all you're going to do then. Suddenly the boy began swaying in his feet, feeling incredibly drained, like he had been fighting for hours instead of a few seconds. Hey, what did you? He didn't get a chance to finish as his eyes rolled back and he dropped bonelessly to the ground. His two friends suddenly released the girl as they backed away from Naruto, not really wanting to mess with somebody who could take out their leader in a single move. He'll be fine in about an hour, he's just exhausted. Even so, you should take him now and go, I don't really want to fight you. Not even waiting for him to finish, the two boys scurried forward, grabbed their friend and dashed off, leaving Naruto alone in the alley with the girl. Thank you, Monk-san. Naruto just gave an easy smile, his almost closed eyes turning up as he waved his hand dismissively. No problem. The girl took the hint as she moved closer, her head finally rising for the first time to reveal a rather cute face and shining black eyes that seemed common in Suna. Matsuri. Naruto smiled again as he reached for his Shikuju, even though he was a bit unnerved by the look of adoration on the girl's face. Well then, no problem, Matsuri, I'm happy to help out. He turned to go but thought better of it as he turned back to face the smaller girl. Just remember, a weapon does not make a shinobi. Find your own way in life, never let others tell you what you're doing is the wrong way. With that last piece of wisdom, the blonde finally made to leave, only to feel a small hand grab onto his own. Wait, I don't know your name. The blonde turned with that same smile that reached his eyes. It's Naruto. Again, he found looking at that admiring stare slightly disconcerting, it was so foreign to him. How can I thank you? Naruto placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, unintentionally reading her chakra, and was pleasantly surprised to find she had good reserves for a 10-year-old considering she was only a year younger than him. You don't, like I said, I was happy to help. And with that he gave a wave and walked off, leaving the jingling of his Shikuju echoing in the alley. Naruto spent the next few days in Suna taking in the various sights as well as doing odd jobs to earn some food. At night he would sleep in a small out-of-the-way temple near the edge of the village, the kindly master reminding him a lot of Chikako. Right now, he was standing outside a very large and very ornate building, one of the few that weren't cylindrical or spherical. He walked through the door, smiling slightly as he saw the rows upon rows of books, stacked high on shelves covering every wall and more. This was what his pilgrimage was about. Every monk chooses something they want to discover or learn about, and they dedicate themselves to it until they are satisfied. Some chose to ponder the mysteries of life and existence, others taking more philosophical routes delving into human nature. Naruto had chosen to try and understand the nature of chakra itself, to follow in his ancestors' footsteps and hopefully one day surpass him. That was why he needed to travel, to gain perspective. Information tended to be heavily biased towards the ones writing it. That was why he needed to gain a broader understanding of the world, to see the bigger picture from as many angles as possible. He couldn't think of a better place to start than a library, especially one in a ninja village where chakra is part of daily life. However, he quickly ran into a problem. The area where all that information was stored happened to be in the shinobi area. He was not a resident of Suna nor was he a shinobi in their ranks, so the information was off limits for him. Of course, if he tried to henge and got caught, he could be severely punished under suspicion of being a spy. He sighed as he sat outside on the steps leading up to the library, watching as a chameleon slowly made its way up the wall, stopping occasionally to blend in. They were remarkable creatures. Evolution had made it so when they were perfectly still and camouflaged, even their chakra was undetectable. He wished he had that ability, it would make getting the information easier. Suddenly a thought struck him as he got up, quickly making his way back through the streets towards the academy. Hey Matsuri! The young brown-haired girl suddenly jumped in surprise as the voice appeared out of nowhere. She sighed as she turned around before a smile found its way to her face as she saw just who it was. Naruto-san. The blonde just chuckled as he rubbed the back of his head, his eyes still appearing to be closed. Just Naruto is fine. How are you doing? The girl beamed, looking very different from the shy and timid person she had been before. Great. Those bullies left me alone and haven't bothered me again. I think they believe you'll come back to finish them if they do. Naruto just returned her beaming grin with one of his own. That's good, good. Suddenly some of the girl's confidence seemed to drain away as she nervously placed her hands behind her back, looking down at her feet. Naruto-san, I want to do what you told me, find my own way to do things without weapons. She clenched her eyes shut for a moment before shooting them open as she brought her hands around to clasp in front of her almost pleadingly. So do you think you could teach me that taijutsu style? Naruto's smile suddenly took a saddened turn as he gently patted Matsuri's shoulder, the girl already knowing what that meant. Sorry Matsuri, that style relies on a special ability of mine that other people can't do, otherwise it is mostly about dodging attacks while redirecting the force of blows in a harmless way. Plus, I haven't even finished it yet, it's part of a larger taijutsu style I am creating. While Matsuri looked saddened, there was also a slightly odd gleam in her eyes. Creating a taijutsu style was supposed to be one of the hardest things a shinobi could do, and a boy who only looked a year older than her and wasn't even a ninja was doing just that. Oh, okay then. She looked down and Naruto couldn't stand to see the dejected look on her face. It was heart-wrenching. But hey, that's not the only thing I could teach you. Suddenly the girl looked back up in a complete emotional 180, hope sparkling in her now drying eyes. Naruto nervously rubbed his head, wondering how Matsuri had managed to flip the conversation around. He was supposed to be the one asking a favor of her. Yeah, I can. He thought for a moment about what he could teach her before a sly grin spread across his face. How about I teach you this? He quickly walked to a nearby wall before placing one foot on and just continuing on up. Wow, that's so cool. The blonde just grinned as he jumped back down before frowning as Matsuri once again emotionally flipped to sadden again. But you've already done so much for me? How can I repay you for this now? Finally, Naruto allowed a small genuine smile on his face as he wrapped one arm around the smaller girl's shoulders. Well, now that you mention it. Naruto was meditating in a park, enjoying the feel of a new space to relax in. He couldn't quite describe it, but the area felt different to his home at the Fire Temple. Not in the traditional sense that it was hotter or it just looked different, it actually physically felt different. He remembered back to the analogy he had given the head monk about the green chakra he could see in the stones and plants. It was like he was seeing a new, different piece of that same puzzle out here in the desert. He would have to think about it more. There was something about this other chakra that he just felt a need to understand. It was too mysterious for him not to try and learn about it. One thing he did know was that he couldn't absorb it with his Preta path, either that or he was doing something wrong when he tried, but for the life of him, he couldn't figure out what. He was disturbed from his thoughts as he felt Matsuri enter the park. That was another thing, when he meditated like that, focusing solely on the other chakra, he gained a limited awareness of the area around himself. Naruto-san? Again, he managed to shock Matsuri as he suddenly dropped down next to her from the branch he had been meditating on, upside down. To her credit though, she didn't yelp out loud like the last time. Matsuri, I already told you just to call me Naruto. The girl waved him off, which actually amused Naruto. It seemed she had once again gained a small confidence boost which he only suspected was good for her. Look, I got the scrolls for you. She quickly produced a set of scrolls for him, 6 of them in total, from a satchel hanging from her shoulder. My brother was really surprised when I asked him to get them for me. Matsuri seemed to almost sparkle with happiness as Naruto gave her a warm smile, the girl suddenly feeling a little lightheaded, and it wasn't from the heat. Thanks a lot, Matsuri, this means a lot to me, and I couldn't have done it without you. It wasn't entirely true, but the blonde didn't think it would be bad to stoke the girl's self-confidence just a little. He created a hand sign and suddenly a perfect replica of himself suddenly appeared, taking the scrolls from the girl. Matsuri just gawked at the very much solid clone the monk had made. At the academy, they only taught the regular clone jutsu, which was a glorified illusion. Wow, can you teach me that? Naruto chuckled as he began to run through a few hand seals. Not really, it requires a lot of chakra, otherwise it's dangerous. Matsuri seemed indignant as Naruto finished his jutsu, placing his hand over the scrolls as another, identical set suddenly poofed into existence. Matsuri didn't even seem surprised anymore after seeing what Naruto could already do. Making clones of the scrolls didn't seem like a stretch. Please? My sensei says I have loads of chakra for my age, the most in our year. For the first time in his young life, Naruto found himself on the receiving end of the dreaded female secret technique, puppy dog eyes no jutsu. For a young boy with little experience with the opposite sex, thanks to his zero interaction with his peers followed by 4 years in a temple, it was too much. Well, I mean, if you really promise to be careful with it, and not use more than one at a time until you're sure you're ready, then I guess. He wasn't allowed to finish as he was suddenly tackled to the ground by an overjoyed Matsuri, her arms wrapped around him in her attempt at a crushing hug. Naruto found it strangely nice. He had been hugged before, but never by a girl. It was certainly different. Thank you so much. Everybody's going to be really jealous when I show them what I can do. Naruto chuckled slightly as the girl finally got off of him, blushing slightly when she noticed what she had been doing. You know humility is the sign of a truly great person. Matsuri's blush deepened as she shyly looked away. Plus, I would really appreciate if you tried to keep it as secret as possible. The technique is not supposed to be known by Suna Shinobi. If you go around showing people, they will get suspicious of where you learned it. I don't think they'll believe a wandering monk was kind enough to teach it to you. Matsuri looked crestfallen at that, so Naruto got up, pulling her with him. He managed to surprise her with his strength. But anyway, how about I show you that first one? You'll need all the chakra control you can for the shadow clone technique. Naruto spent almost a month teaching Matsuri. He had to be very careful when teaching her the shadow clone jutsu. It turned out even after learning the surface clinging technique she had difficulties, so he had gone on to teach her how to walk on water. After that he was very grateful for his ability to pass on his chakra to other people, as Matsuri could barely make 2 clones in a row before almost passing out from chakra exhaustion. By the end she was embarrassingly calling him Naruto-sensei, but nevertheless she got it. They didn't get a lot of time to practice between her going to the academy and her responsibilities at the orphanage, something the two shared in common. It was enlightening for Naruto to finally gain a friend around his age besides Sora, and talking with a girl proved to be very new to him. With Sora he shared a very competitive rivalry, even the smallest thing could set the two off. With Matsuri on the other hand he likened it to an almost brother-sister relationship, or at least that was how he pictured it, even if Matsuri felt differently. Right now, he was sitting in one of the many training grounds outside of Suna village, but still within the mighty walls. He had to be there as it was one of the few grounds with trees that could grow leaves in the desert's harsh climate. The scrolls Matsuri had brought him proved to be very interesting, especially the ones about wind chakra. Being Kaze no Kuni, Tsunagakure proved to have the most comprehensive knowledge of wind-natured chakra in the elemental nations. Right now, though he was practicing the leaf-cutting exercise, he could already do it, but he was working on cleaning up his cut into a perfect line. It wasn't like he could move on to the next stage anyway. There were no waterfalls within the village. Suna Shinobi wanting to master wind chakra were taken to a special oasis somewhere that was a secret. He was also working on his fire manipulation at the same time, so pretty soon he had run out of leaves, forcing him to move into the training ground he was sitting in today. He had also looked for any hint of this other chakra. He kept feeling, even sitting in a sandy, almost lifeless field like this one, he could see the faintest hints of that green chakra. Unfortunately, nothing like that was mentioned in any of the scrolls Matsuri had brought him. He had found references to the life force of the world, but that didn't sound quite right. He was sure what he saw was a type of chakra and life force was supposed to be very different. He was roused from both his thoughts and his training as he felt a set of eyes on him. Looking up he saw a young girl, maybe 2 or 3 years older than him. Her sandy blonde hair matched the color of the dusty ground beneath them, and was pulled into 4 spiky ponytails, not dissimilar from his. She wore a long white shirt that almost looked like a dress on her, loosely tied around her waist by a light blue sash. Right now, she was staring at him with curiosity, the Suna headband tied around her neck shifting as she cocked her head. "Hey! Who are you and why are you in my training ground?" Chapter 7, Win 2. Naruto stared at the older girl for a moment, not that she could really tell due to his eyes being narrowed as they were. Slowly he stood up from his meditative position, gave a small bow to the girl, and made to leave. "I apologize, I didn't realize this area was taken. I'll leave you then." He continued to walk off, the jangling of his shikuju the only sound in the relatively small space. The girl just seemed confused at the odd blonde's very polite apology and watched as the monk walked towards the exit of the training ground. However, when she noticed the many split leaves all over the ground as well as a few burnt ones, her eyes widened. "Wait." Naruto was mildly surprised as he felt a hand wrap around his arm as the girl tugged him back. She held one of the many split leaves in front of him, a small recognizable sparkle in her eyes as she smiled at him. "You're practicing wind manipulation?" Naruto nodded once, his usual smile still spread across his features. He crouched to the ground, picking up a leaf before holding it out to the girl. To her amazement, it quickly spit straight down the middle, the cut still slightly jagged, which mildly annoyed Naruto. "Oh wow, that was really good. Baki-sensei told me about this, but he won't let me try it yet." She suddenly became shy as she looked down at her feet, noticing the newly split leaf float to the ground as Naruto released it. "Sometimes though I sneak out here to try it, but all I can ever get it a tiny cut." Suddenly a mildly suspicious look alighted on her rather pretty features, in Naruto's opinion. "Who are you anyway? I don't recognize you from the academy. I would have remembered your hair." Naruto chuckled at that as he leaned against a tree, for now resting his staff to the side. "I'm not from Suna. I'm just traveling, trying to learn all I can about chakra." The other blonde blinked at that. As far as she knew, elemental manipulation was only used by shinobi. "So, you're like a monk?" Naruto smiled warmly again as he gestured to the staff, which made her slightly embarrassed. "I am a monk. This is part of my pilgrimage." The Suna genin now just seemed confused. Only a few minutes with Naruto, and she already had more questions than answers. "But don't monks just, pray or meditate and stuff?" Naruto slowly slid down the tree to a cross-legged sitting position. It didn't seem like he would be leaving anytime soon. Seeing no reason not to, the girl joined him, attempting to copy his sitting position, but only managing a loose facsimile. "I think you are confusing us with priests. We don't pray." Naruto shook his head, thinking better of that. At least many of us don't. Everybody is entitled to their belief after all. Being a monk is more a way of life than a faith. We simply take up the values of clean living, kindness, and peace. The girl's eyes seemed slightly wider after he finished, the smallest hints of admiration in her eyes that quickly became skeptical. "Aren't you a little young? You seem even younger than I am." Naruto just gave her an easy grin which caught her off guard. She had expected her comment to rile him up slightly, not that she had wanted to exactly. Most people got annoyed when you underestimated them. "Like I said, it's a way of life. There is no age limit, only that you understand what you are committing to. I myself am 11. The girl settled at that, although she was still slightly skeptical. That was the age of a fourth-year academy student. "My name is Naruto, by the way." The girl was pushed from her thoughts by a hand held out in front of her. After a moment of hesitation, she took it, shaking it once. "Temari." Again, Naruto just gave an easy grin as Temari got into a more comfortable sitting position. "It's not for everybody." At that, Temari chuckled as she drew her legs underneath her, resting on one hand, the dusty ground seemingly not concerning her. "So, you're interested in wind manipulation?" Temari nodded enthusiastically as she idly played with a leaf in her hands, concentrating for a moment as a tiny cut appeared where her fingers were holding it. "Yeah, my father got me a battle fan when I graduated the academy, so I want to train with it and make him proud. My dream is to be just like Pakura-sama, to be a strong kunoichi like her and earn a name for myself. Naruto gave a small eye smile that had a certain masked shinobi in Konoha sneezing. "That is a good goal, I wish you luck." He got up to leave but once again found Temari holding his arm, preventing him from leaving. This made him arch an eyebrow. The other blonde looked down for a moment, seemingly conflicted about what she was about to say. "Would you mind helping me?" Naruto blinked before suddenly laughing, causing an irritated expression to form on the older blonde's face. "Hey, what's so funny? Just because I'm a kunoichi I'm not good enough for you to help? Don't you know how hard it was to ask for help from somebody 2 years younger than you?" Naruto stopped himself, wiping away an imaginary tear as he straightened up, his hand waving apologetically. "Sorry, it wasn't that, but I'm just amazed you're the second person who has asked me that since I arrived here. Of course, I would be happy to offer what help I can. Oh, and the first person to ask for my help was a kunoichi too, so don't go using your gender as an excuse to get angry with people." It's unbecoming. He bent down, picking up a leaf and handing it to the girl before gently placing his hand around hers, causing the older girl to blush. What are you doing? Naruto gave her a disarming smile that made her relax slightly without entirely knowing why. I want you to try to split the leaf. I'm going to see what you are doing. I can read your chakra through contact. Temari seemed unsure. She had heard of sensor ninja before, but never ones that required contact. It seemed impractical. Even so, she began to channel chakra into the leaf, doing her best to change it into wine nature based on what information she had gotten from a few older genin and chunin. Sure enough, a tiny slice appeared where her fingers gripped the leaf, which made the girl deflate. It looked so pathetic compared to all the completely split leaves littering the ground. Alright, I think I see your problem. Temari looked up before her face took on a hint of red as she noticed Naruto was still holding her hand. The younger boy barely noticed as he was more focused on what he had felt and was looking off to the side. You are trying to convert your chakra into wind while it is still inside your body. You need to be doing that at the moment it is released, not too much before or after. Try it again and keep that in mind. Doing her best to combat her growing blush, Temari accepted another leaf handed to her before repeating the technique. Naruto was pleasantly surprised as he felt her chakra begin to shift into a specific nature just before she released it into the leaf. Temari was far more ecstatic as she saw the leaf split 3/4 of the way through. It was a rather rough, jagged cut, but it was a marked improvement. Wow, that was amazing, just one hint and I improved so much. She gave the younger blonde a gleaming grin, and suddenly Naruto was the one who found a tad more color in his cheeks. He had thought of Matsuri as cute before, but Temari was most certainly very pretty. He was broken from his slight daze as he saw a hand waving in front of his face, and a confused Temari staring at his blank expression. Ahia, that was really good, but you are letting your chakra build up before you release it. That can be quite dangerous when you are shifting the element. Once you convert chakra to a different element, it becomes harder to control because it is not entirely yours anymore. You have opened it up to the element itself. You need to release it as a continuous flow, but this will come with practice. Temari smiled and nodded. After being helped so much, she was about ready to take the blonde's words as gospel. However, a frown momentarily marred her brow. What do you mean it's dangerous? Naruto thought for a moment for a way to describe it before looking up. Just because you perform a jutsu, does that mean you are immune to its effects? Temari quickly shook her head in the negative. Her sensei had stressed that many more tactically minded shinobi would use their opponent's strengths to their advantage. Well, then it's no different to the chakra that makes up the technique. While not impossible, it is highly difficult to control an unpredictable element like lightning or wind inside one's body. Temari just nodded at the logic. She found Naruto to be a very good teacher. He found simple ways to explain things. Now if you want to improve the smoothness of the cut. He picked up another leaf and split it quickly, holding it up to compare with Temari's. You need to focus on sharpening your chakra. Imagine it like two of the finest swords scraping against one another, sharp and fine. Temari once again nodded before grabbing a few leaves and retreating further away into the training ground. Naruto returned to his meditative position before fishing out one of the scrolls Matsuri had given him. A few hours passed as Naruto calmly continued to read his scroll about chakra. There wasn't a lot he didn't already know, but it was still interesting. Over that time, he had heard many cries of success as well as irritated shouts of frustration. In either case, they brought small smiles to his lips. He was sure Sora and Temari would have much to talk about, both being avid wind enthusiasts. He briefly wondered how a confrontation would go, but was interrupted as he felt somebody shake his shoulders. He looked up to see Temari, a victorious and self-satisfied smile on her face as she held a leaf in front of her. She put it between both of her palms before gaining a look of intense concentration. After a few moments she looked up and opened her palms. Between them, cut down the middle with very wonky and jagged line, was the leaf. However, Naruto was very much impressed. She had managed to completely split the leaf. Her affinity to wind must be incredibly strong. I did it. Naruto returned the beaming grin Temari was giving him with a smaller, more reserved one of his own. That's wonderful, you improved really quickly. Temari just gave a small snort of agreement as she plopped down next to the seated monk. Yeah, but I couldn't have gotten nearly this far without your help. Naruto gave a small conceding nod before grinning. All you have to do now is work on straightening your cut and doing it without having to concentrate so much, and you'll be ready to move on to the next stage. I'm sure your sensei will be very surprised. Temari almost gleamed as he said that before looking across at the blonde curiously. There's a next step? The younger blonde gave a small nod as he began to absently draw out a waterfall with the end of his shikoju. Yes, you have to split a waterfall with your chakra. Temari gulped at that as she saw Naruto sketch out a small stickman in the sand underneath the waterfall. This first stage was about control and precision, the next stage is about power and maintaining a steady, constant stream of wind chakra. Temari seemed daunted by such an imposing task while Naruto appeared nonplussed. It's getting late. Temari was roused from her trepidation as she looked up. Sure enough, the sun was beginning to dip over behind the buildings. Oh, I have to get home. She shot to her feet and began to race towards the entrance of the training ground. However, she suddenly turned and waved. Will I see you again? Naruto shrugged with a lopsided smile. Hey, anything can happen. Temari smiled cutely before turning and running back home, leaving an amused blonde to puzzle how he managed to get into these situations. It turned out Naruto did see Temari again, more than a few times, seeing as it was her training ground and Naruto didn't bother to move. After the first day though, there wasn't really much he could actively help her with besides a few pointers. Steadily they both improved, Naruto slightly faster due to starting earlier, his better chakra control and understanding the nature of wind chakra better thanks to his reading. He had recommended Temari read as well, but she was more the type to learn by repeated practice, very much like Sora, and how Naruto used to be. He still learnt mainly by that method, but now he liked to try and understand what he was doing better. One day, about a week into their strange meetings, Temari brought her fan along. Naruto hadn't known what to expect when the older blonde mentioned her battle fan, but he hadn't been expecting an enormous steel bar that was as tall as the girl was herself. However, as he expected, the girl had quite a bit of difficulty moving the enormous wind weapon. Suddenly Naruto had something new to teach her. Slowly Temari got the hang of reinforcing her muscles with chakra, as well as timing bursts of energy to increase the power behind her swings. So, she was able to swing the large fan around as if it were made of paper like its more traditional counterparts. Apparently, her father had been incredibly impressed when she had shown him, but thankfully, she heeded the blonde's advice and didn't mention the monk. When Naruto had found out her father was the Kazekage himself, he wasn't entirely sure what to think. It didn't particularly change his opinion of the girl like Temari had expected. He believed everybody was their own person, regardless of who their parents were. The older blonde was pleased by that. Usually people would avoid her due to her being the honored daughter of Yondaime-sama. Of course, there was another glaring reason why people avoided her, but that had nothing to do with her father. Naruto didn't neglect his time with Matsuri either, but between her time at the academy and Temari's obligations with missions, he didn't see either as much as they both probably wanted. So far, the two had yet to meet thanks to some strategic planning on the blonde's part. He wasn't sure how the shinobi of the village or the Kazekage himself would react to him giving pointers or, in some cases, jutsu to the girls, especially as one was his daughter. He wanted to keep his involvement as quiet as possible, and that meant keeping his two students apart. One day he was just finishing up a scroll that he was particularly captivated with. It described old Suna shinobi using techniques known as free-form wind manipulation, what used to be the highest caliber in that discipline. It involved saturating the area in wind chakra that the shinobi would then directly control with their chakra. No hand seals were involved. However, due to the difficulty, large reserves required and years of dedicated training necessary, it had become a dead art. There was nobody in the village that still used it or even attempted it anymore, and only a handful of shinobi had ever managed it. Suddenly he was interrupted as somebody new landed in the training ground. Luckily, he was underneath the shade of a tree, the sun at his back, hiding him from sight somewhat. The newcomer, a boy perhaps a year older than him with spiky brown hair, and an almost perpetual scowl on his features, immediately made their way over to Temari. The girl had been dutifully practicing the leaf-cutting exercise, but quickly hid the results behind her, not wanting anybody to find out about her training just yet. Naruto saw the two speak in hushed but urgent tones before both raced off suddenly back towards the village. Knowing he wasn't going to get anything done now that he was curious, Naruto got up and followed after them quietly, once again silencing his Shikuju. It didn't take Naruto long to lose them in the midst of Suna's winding streets and throngs of people. He had gotten used to the village somewhat, but Temari and the other boy had moved off at shinobi paces, and Naruto didn't want to draw attention to himself. However, soon he noticed the streets becoming quiet as less and less people moved about outside. Continuing to walk in that direction, he soon found himself completely alone on the streets, which was odd as the sun was only just beginning to move past the horizon. More people should have been out. He finally reached a small park enclosed on all sides by buildings. It was more a strip of bare land really, just a sandy space with no buildings. At the center of the park was a lone boy, probably around the same age as Naruto was. Curious as to why the boy was out here all alone, Naruto approached him, now able to pick details. He had dull red hair, closer to brown really, framing a set of teal-green eyes and pale white skin. There were strange black rings around the boy's eyes that reminded the blonde of his own whisker marks. Most curiously, the kanji for love was seemingly tattooed on the boy's forehead above his left eye in bright red. He was sitting cross-legged with his hands in his lap, just staring ahead into space almost lifelessly. Occasionally he would mutter something Naruto couldn't quite make out in a low gravelly tone. Slowly Naruto settled down into a seated position of his own across from the boy, neither saying anything for a while. After a minute or two Naruto closed his eyes, somewhat enjoying the perfect quiet that permeated the area. He had missed this from the temple, unable to find many places of solace in the bustling shinobi village. "Why are you here?" The other boy's voice finally shattered the comfortable silence Naruto had lapsed into, his grave voice sounding emotionless. This seemed like as good a spot as any to meditate. It is rare to find such solitude in a village like this. The other boy looked up, regarding Naruto coolly with bloodshot eyes. It was apparent he hadn't slept in some time. "People avoid me, they know better than to come near me. Their blood stains my sand when they do." Naruto looked up, his eyes opening slightly. He wasn't naive, he saw the redhead slowly push his chakra into the sand around them. The time he had spent meditating, he had been absorbing it all in a meter radius. There was something about the boy's chakra that was familiar to him. The only way to describe it would be a less potent version of his own. "Why?" Gaara blinked once, his face still an emotionless mask. Naruto wasn't sure if that was to do with his mindset, or whatever the thin layer of chakra covering his body was. "Mother demands their blood, and doing so proves my existence." Naruto nodded slowly, as if he were accepting the statement at face value, actually mildly surprising the redhead. "You think killing proves your existence? That taking a life somehow increases the value of your own?" The redhead growled suddenly as the sands around him began to writhe violently, save for a small circle around Naruto where they were perfectly still. "If mother demands it, then I must do as she says, otherwise." The boy suddenly gripped his head right over the tattoo. He was obviously in pain as he began to mumble to himself in hushed, apologetic tones. As suddenly as it happened, it seemed to stop. The boy looked back up, murder in his eyes as he glared at the blonde. Naruto continued to calmly observe all of this, not particularly straining himself to absorb the chakra in the sand around him. That was the great thing about the Preta path. It wasn't like normal jutsu. The more he used it, the more energized he felt, and he could vent excess chakra directly into the ground. This of course had the added benefit of acting like a buffer to the other boy's chakra, making it more difficult for him to affect the sand. This silent staring match as the two boys asserted their dominance without words lasted for about another minute. although it felt considerably longer. Finally, the other boy let out a grin, and even though it didn't even hold a drop of warmth, Naruto returned it. Mother says you are strong, she wants to see your eyes. She screams at me to rip open your eyes. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, curious now to who this mother was and how she was so well informed. Suddenly long tendrils of sand lashed out at Naruto, obviously aiming to crush him into the ground. However, just like before, as soon as they came within a certain distance of him, they fell limply to the ground, disintegrating into the lifeless sand grains they should be before being reflected by some sort of invisible barrier. You are strong, but you cannot deny Mother her desired blood. The boy continued to throw attack after attack at Naruto, who remained perfectly still, focusing on keeping his sand out of range of him. You know I don't even know your name. The other boy paused in a rare lull of violence as the sand began to sway more neutrally. I am Gaara no Sabaku. Naruto chuckled slightly as another sand whip fell uselessly to the ground around him. What an appropriate moniker, I am Naruto Uzumaki, could you please stop attacking me now? It seemed Gaara somewhat saw the futility in his actions, nothing he was doing could even faze the blonde. It unnerved the redhead. The only person who did not fear him like this was his father. The two shared that same unsettling calm, while in his presence. The only difference was that Naruto's expression was warm while his father's was eternally cold. Why do you not fear me, Uzumaki? For once Gaara's voice lacked the bloodthirsty edge, there was genuine curiosity in his words. What reason do I have to? The redhead blinked in surprise. The blonde was right. None of his attacks had even come close to affecting him. How are you so strong? Naruto sighed, but the smile never left his face, behind his cheery demeanor though he was alert. He knew the boy in front of him was obviously anything but stable, and to let his guard down now would be foolish. He may have been kind and wanted to help the boy, but he was anything but an idiot. Chiriko had seen fit to beat that out of him quickly enough. That is a difficult question to answer. Some might say it is due to circumstances out of my control, or maybe it is in my blood. I like to think it is because I train hard to better myself. Gaara shook his head, looking like a dog unsatisfied with a meal. No. What drives you? What allows you to be so strong? Naruto blinked before looking down and thought. Gaara used the opportunity to try and attack the blonde again, but the attempts were quickly rebuked. I want to understand. Gaara's attacks all stopped at once as the redhead once again regarded Naruto carefully. What do you mean? Naruto looked up, a kind smile adorning his features. I wish to understand the world, people, chakra. I want to learn and know these things. To do so I have to grow stronger. To understand people is to understand the world, and it is only through understanding will we reach peace. I don't want to see the people who are precious to me get hurt or suffer, so I have to understand in order to strive for peace. Gaara looked down at that, his hair shadowing his eyes as he seemed to contemplate the words. Prove it to me. His words were nothing but a whisper, barely carried by the breeze over to Naruto. Prove to me that your method of gaining power is superior. I fight because I refuse to let my existence be erased. Now prove it to me. Fight me, Uzumaki. Even as Naruto watched, the sand around Gaara began to congregate, draw together as if by some unseen will. Now Naruto finally understood. The thin shell around Gaara's body prevented him from seeing, but now, as the sand began to form into some misshapen creature, he could see it all too clearly. Gaara was a Jinchuriki like him. The signs were all there. Flowing through the sand was the same red chakra that Naruto had and Sora once possessed. However, it was not as thick or as potent as the Kyuubi's chakra, not surprising considering it had to be a less powerful Bijuu inside of him by default. Naruto sighed slowly. Right now he was looking into a mirror of what he might have been. He could only imagine what must have happened to Gaara to make him this way. It was also obvious his Bijuu was affecting him, no doubt this mother he spoke of. I don't intend to fight you, Gaara. The redhead just laughed maniacally, drool beginning to drop from his extended mouth as his features took on the likeness of a raccoon. Naruto had done his research since finding out about his status as a Jinchuriki. What he was looking at was the vessel of the Ichibi no Tanuki, the One-Tail. It's not your choice. Now mother wants your blood. Naruto knew this was a problem. Gaara had begun to leak off his Bijuu's chakra in droves. Naruto was doing his best to absorb it from the air, but he knew it was only a matter of time before this was investigated. Unfortunately, that meant he had to make this quick. Very well, I am sorry then. Naruto calmly raised a single hand as Gaara's long sandy tail began to sway menacingly, the point sharpened in preparation of impaling the blonde. Naruto opened his eyes fully for quite possibly the first time since arriving in Sunagakure no Sato, but in his bloodlust Gaara wasn't even paying attention. One of the rings around his eyes suddenly seemed to contract slightly as a rush of intense chakra moved through his body. Shinra Tensei. He didn't even shout the name of the technique, so Gaara was all the more oblivious as he was suddenly struck by an incredible, invisible force. His feet remained firmly stuck to the ground by chakra he had already been channeling, but a great deal of his protective sand layer had been blown off, enough to expose Gaara's body. Just as calmly Naruto raised his other hand up, this time, instead of his palm being flat out, it was cupped slightly. Banzho Tenin. Focusing on the small redhead as opposed to the mass of sand recongregating on his body, Naruto gently pulled his hand back an inch. The effect was immediate as Gaara suddenly flew forward, his eyes wide in shock as his sand cloak was left where it was, twitching slightly in confusion. This confusion meant he could do nothing, nor could his sand react fast enough as he suddenly found himself being held up by Naruto in one hand. The blonde suddenly dropped the frightened redhead, which left him sprawled out on the ground, his eyes fearfully looking up at Naruto. It only lasted a second before Naruto gently pressed the end of his staff against the Jinchuriki's forehead. Immediately Gaara found he could not move, his whole body was paralyzed, he couldn't even move his eyes or speak. Even so, the sheer terror in his eyes as Naruto walked over and crouched down beside him was unmistakable. I am not going to hurt you, Gaara, but at the same time I cannot allow you to hurt me. Don't worry, this paralysis will wear off in about an hour, or I can release it myself if you promise to calm down. Surprisingly, there was no hint of patronization in his voice, and his expression only spoke of genuine concern. Gaara had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Here this boy could end his life with less effort than it would take to scrape dirt from his sandal, and Gaara didn't even have his sand armor. Naruto didn't wait for a response as he once again tapped Gaara on the forehead with his staff. Why? Naruto regarded Gaara for a moment as he got back up, the sands immediately swarming to him and congealing back into his ultimate defense. Because we share a common burden, and I know better than anybody that you don't deserve any more suffering. Suddenly the two were interrupted as Asuna Shinobi dropped down from a nearby rooftop, looking hesitantly at Gaara and suspiciously at Naruto. Gaara, you will go see your father immediately. The redhead looked at the man for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly before widening in shock. Naruto had placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, the sand falling away harmlessly at his touch. His automatic defense hadn't even quivered at the blonde's approach, and for the first time in his entire life Gaara felt the warmth of human contact. He looked to Naruto with an amazement that was only mirrored by the shinobi standing there watching, and after a moment of deliberation he turned and walked off. When he was gone, Naruto turned his attention to the older shinobi, who had interrupted. He was a tall man with the standard attire for a Suna Jounin, with the addition of a white linen veil covering half of his face. In turn the man glared at the monk, simultaneously trying to ascertain his motives and understand exactly what he just did. Finally, with a look of resolution, the man nodded curtly before gesturing after Gaara's retreating form. I believe the Kazekage will also want to speak with you. Naruto gave a calm nod before gesturing for the man to lead the way, which he did after a small frown flickered across his features. Chapter 8, Win 3. The two moved at a reasonable pace through the still quiet streets of Suna, Naruto's staff jingling with each step. The Jounin accompanying him cast him glances every now and then, to check he was still there, or for some other reason the blonde wasn't sure. Naruto was thinking about what the Kazekage might talk to him about, or what he wanted to say to the Kazekage. He may be a monk, but he knew if a Kage suspected somebody of being a danger to their village, they would not hesitate to deal with that problem. Sadly, he knew that applied to the Hokage as well, one of the reasons his thoughts on Konoha were so mixed right now. So why did you wait so long? The blonde's voice cut through the evening air like a knife, shattering the uneasy silence that had settled there despite his warm tone. The shinobi just looked down at him for a moment before looking ahead, either ignoring the monk or confused by his words. You know, when my chakra touched Gaara's, I could sense everything his sand was connected to, including you hiding up on the rooftop. It had been a rather odd experience at first, suddenly having his senses stretched out as his chakra connected with the Ichibi Jinchurikis. I don't know what you mean. Naruto ignored the comment. He had definitely felt the Jounin hiding up on the rooftop. He had been there since Gaara had begun to partially transform. I wonder if you were under orders not to interfere. They continued walking at the same steady pace, but the glances Naruto was getting were less frequent. Maybe you were curious. It is a rather fundamental human desire to know more. Again, he got no reaction from the stoic Jounin as they continued to lazily wind through the streets. Perhaps you were simply afraid, although of what I am not sure. Sure. That time Naruto got a reaction, a subtle flex of the older man's hands that denoted his irritation. Learning body language had come quite quickly to Naruto at the temple. It was not only a useful skill to pick up, it was great when trying to ascertain somebody's motives. When you lived in a compound filled with people all wearing the same thing and most having shaven head, it was helpful to know so you could identify people. There was also the fact that monks tended to be rather calm and collected people, and for Naruto to annoy somebody he had to know what they were feeling. Naruto wasn't sure why they had taken this rather slow, civilian pace. He could very easily hop across rooftops like shinobi could. Using chakra to enhance one's muscles to run faster and jump higher, as well as using it to stick to surfaces, was pretty fundamental. It was part of the process of controlling the chakra running through one's body. Monks did this primarily to slow their body's internal functions like heart rate, breathing and metabolism, allowing them to meditate for hours or even days on end. Naruto even knew a man who had perfected it to the point where, if he stayed unmoving, he could meditate for a month between meals with no ill effects. He put it down to either the shinobi underestimating him, not knowing about his skills, or not wanting Naruto to know that he knew about his skills. Either way, the monk was fairly content to just amble on. Besides the man, they were in a part of Suna Naruto hadn't been around much, so it was nice to take it all in while the streets were quiet like this. That was another thing, even when the streets in a shinobi village were empty, there would still be activity from the ninja. Tonight, Naruto saw nothing, no chakra signatures, no roof-hopping shinobi, nothing. It was curious. My name is Naruto, by the way. The Jounin looked around briefly, staring at the blonde for a few seconds with narrowed eyes before turning back around. Baki. It was more of a grunt than a word. It was clear the man didn't enjoy Naruto's company. The blonde simply raised a brow. So, this was Temari-sensei. Finally, the pair made it to probably the largest building in Suna, the enormous spherical structure bearing the kanji for wind, which told Naruto it was the Kazekage Tower, at least if things worked the same here as they did in Konoha. He had been outside of this building a few times before, but never inside. The monk liked to consider it a new opportunity presenting itself. With a smile, Naruto quickly followed Baki through the various corridors and stairs of the large structure, somewhere towards the middle. Naruto assumed it was for making protecting the Kazekage easier, more walls between him and potential threats. The idea seemed laughable to Naruto. The Kage was supposed to be the strongest in the village, wasn't he? Finally, they were stopped outside of a door by a young pretty assistant who looked at the blonde for a moment before motioning to his shikoju. No weapons in the Kazekage office. She reached out to take it, but Naruto withdrew his hand slightly, making both Baki and the other shinobi hidden in the shadows tense. I wouldn't touch her if I were you. She's a little temperamental about who holds her. The assistant simply stared at him incredulously for a moment, but relaxed as Naruto simply set the long staff against a wall. He had given the warning, what happened after that was not his concern. He was quickly patted down to make sure he wasn't carrying any more weapons, which once again made the blonde roll his eyes, not that anybody could see. You can go in now. Despite the various annoyances, Naruto smiled amicably at the woman before once again following Baki into the room. Naruto had to admit the room itself was rather nice. The walls were painted a calming violet with various pictures across the walls, mostly scenery shots of Suna and the surrounding desert. A large ornate desk sat towards the back of the room. Sat behind it was a middle-aged man staring at him with curiosity, yet he exuded an air of power and confidence. He had rusty brown hair that spiked out. It was more controlled than his son's, but there was no mistaking the resemblance between this man and Gaara. The revelation that Temari was the Jinchuriki's sister came as a bit of surprise. She had never even once mentioned a brother. Passing those thoughts for now, Naruto moved to the center of the room before bowing slightly. It was enough to show the appropriate level of submission, but not to the point of being sarcastic or a sycophant. The man seemed like the type who needed to feel secure as the strongest in the room. Kazekage-sama, I'm honored you would call for me. The man's studious eyes took in Naruto's form without missing a single detail, his gaze hovering over the blonde's narrowed eyes for a moment. Finally he seemed somewhat satisfied and turned to Baki, who had taken up a rigid position in the corner of the room. You did not mention the boy was a monk. Baki subtly gulped, but the action was definitely not lost on anybody in the room. Apologies, Kazekage-sama. The powerful man's gaze only lingered on the nervous man for a single second before returning to the blonde in front of him. What is your interest in my son? Naruto blinked at the bluntness of the question, then again, he rationalized this was hardly a meeting between Kage or daimyo where subtleties were traded like kunai on a battlefield. As far as the Kazekage was concerned, Naruto was nothing more than a monk with some interesting abilities. I have no more interest in your son Kazekage-sama than I do in any other person where we can exchange polite conversation, and even words of wisdom. The man's eyebrows raised slightly at that. The blonde's words were smooth, and the man detected no hint of a lie. Why did you approach him in the first place? Naruto continued to smile warmly, his eyes remaining as narrowed as ever. I saw a boy my own age alone in a park. Like any inquisitive person, I wanted to understand why he was alone. Again, the Kazekage was pleasantly surprised by the slick answer. The blonde seemed to answer honestly, yet his words were vague. Would you have still approached the boy had you known he has killed multiple times? To the man's slight disappointment, Naruto didn't even bat an eye at that, seeming no more concerned than if he had told him Gaara's hobby was cultivating cacti. It is unfortunate the events that lead to a man killing. Yet condemning him before you attempt to understand why a man does what he does is just as bad as allowing him to perform the deed itself. The Kazekage again raised a brow as he detected what could have been a jab at his abilities to watch over his son, yet the monk's words hid that well. Anyway, from what I saw, Gaara-san acts in self-defense, or in the presence of what he perceives as a threat, am I right? Upon the Kazekage not answering him, Naruto took that as a yes. Plus, I don't believe you can truly blame him. I'm sure I would be tightly wounded if I had an 8-story tanuki whispering in my ear all day. At that everybody in the room tensed, besides Naruto of course, while the ruler of Suna continued to observe him carefully, finding the monk increasingly interested. And what would you mean by that? Naruto chuckled slightly, noticing Baki narrow his eyes at the perceived lack of respect from the periphery of his vision. Please Kazekage-sama, I may be young, but I am not naive. This is not my first encounter with a Jinchuriki. That wasn't a total lie at least. Sora was technically one. From his attacks and the fact we are in the desert makes it likely he contains the Ichibi no Tanuki. Kazekage seemed impressed, for one so young to make such an astute observation, about such a rare subject no less, was remarkable. And knowing this makes you see him no differently? Naruto finally showed an emotion other than calm serenity as he raised an eyebrow in slight amusement. As far as I understand it, drawing a storage seal on one's stomach does not turn them into a kunai. The Kazekage leaned forward in his chair, steepling his fingers as he gazed at Naruto intently. I suppose you are right, young monk. Naruto nodded in a slightly exaggerated show of appreciation that only served to make the man before him amused rather than angry. If I may, Kazekage. After a few more seconds of intense staring, the spiky-haired man nodded curtly. Why has nothing been done about Gaara's condition? There was silence in the office for a few moments as the man seemed to weigh up his response, that, or he enjoyed making people wait to assert his dominance. Neither would have surprised Naruto from what he had seen so far. Gaara is a shinobi of this village. He will continue to be so until his usefulness as a weapon that can be used to protect this village ceases. Other than that, I have no real reason to tell you anything, monk. You may be a spy, most likely from Konoha with that fire emblem on your robes. You are only standing here out of my grace and curiosity. Many have never received the honor nor never will. Naruto just continued to smile, outwardly unconcerned by the information, inwardly rather bored by the back and forth. He may have been tempered by the temple, but he was still an 11-year-old and politics would only interest him as long as it was relevant. I am from the Fire Temple in Hai no Kuni. I proudly wear this symbol to both honor my home and my master, just as any shinobi proudly adorns the symbol for his village on his headband. The Kazekage merely nodded absently with a rather dismissive flick of his hand that actually rather irked Naruto. He would have thought a Kage of all people would have understood the importance of a symbol. In either case, I want you to stay away from my son. If my shinobi ever see you approach him, I will not hesitate in removing you from my village. Understood, monk of Hai no Kuni? The blonde tilted his head slightly as his smile widened a little, unsettling the jounin in the corner at how calm somebody so young could be in the presence of a Kage. Of course, Kazekage-sama. With that, the leader of Suna motioned for him to leave as his eyes drifted back to the paperwork on his desk. As Naruto reached the door, though, the man called out in a calm and perfectly level voice, not even looking up from his work. That includes my daughter Naruto Uzumaki. At that, the blonde paused in his step, if only for the slightest of moments, causing the Kazekage to smirk ever so slightly. Outside the office, Naruto and Baki found a curious sight. The assistant lay sprawled out on the ground, softly snoring with sweat covering her body. Naruto's Shikuju lay to the side of her, thankfully not touching her, as well as Asuna Chunin, who was in a similar state. The rest of the people in the room were staring at the simple wooden staff like it was cursed, while Naruto simply sighed deeply. I told her she was temperamental. Nobody ever just takes me for my word. Without another word, he reached forward and picked up the staff, raising a brow at the collective intake of breath from the others in the room. However, when Naruto didn't even seem concerned by the demon Shikuju, he got a few strange looks before everybody cautiously returned to what they were doing. Naruto turned back to Baki to see if he would be escorted from the building, but was surprised, instead found himself looking into a set of teal-green eyes. He wasn't the only one. Naruto had never seen a room clear so fast before, the people looking terrified of the young Jinchuriki as they hurried from the room. A few were even shooting Naruto piteous looks even as they themselves fled from Gaara's sight. Naruto noticed the boy now supported a large gourd on his back, which he could see was laced with incredible amounts of chakra. The two simply stared at one another, neither saying a word, while Baki watched from the side, waiting to see what Naruto would do. Surprisingly, Gaara gave a small inclination of his head with slightly narrowed eyes before walking on into the building. Both Naruto and Baki raised an eyebrow at that, but it was the jounin who let out a small sigh of relief. The wind user would never admit it to anybody, but Gaara scared him. In fact, the only people that weren't scared of the Jinchuriki were his father, due to his ability to suppress Shikaku, and Naruto, who simply seemed unnaturally calm in these situations. After a moment of silence, Baki realized Naruto was looking at him oddly before he remembered why he was still here. He motioned with his hand for the blonde to follow him, and Naruto did after giving a small but warm smile. Baki continued to watch him as they left. It was just unnatural. The next few days were rather amusing for the blonde. The Kazekage had seen fit to reward him with an entourage, from the shadows of course. The blonde had been finally allowed to let his prankster side out a little after suppressing it for too long. He rather enjoyed the memories he got every night as his shadow clone would dispel. They varied from wandering around the village to meditating for hours, but that wasn't the point. It was the satisfaction from knowing his watchers were bored out of their minds every day watching him do absolutely nothing. In the meantime, Naruto would continue to go to his out-of-the-way training ground to read and occasionally train Matsuri in whatever she asked of him, as long as he believed she wouldn't hurt herself. She continued to be an attentive and diligent pupil, soaking up information and instructions with enthusiasm and determination. Honestly, he believed her to be a better shinobi than the fools chasing around a clone all day without a clue. He knew the feeling of being underestimated, and it irked him to no end, usually because it was about his height or age. However, he also understood when such things were useful, now being one of those times. Nobody expected that he was able to form fully functioning and solid clones, and if they even suspected, the fact he could maintain it all day convinced them otherwise. It should have been an impossible feat for a normal 11-year-old. He got that from Matsuri, who could maintain a single clone for about 5 minutes before needing a recharge. Of course, Naruto was no normal 11-year-old. Strangely though today he wasn't met in his training ground by Matsuri, or even Temari, although he expected the girl had been warned away from him by her father. He felt his chakra in the sand beneath him intruded upon long before Gaara even came into view. Curiously, he neither sensed nor saw any kind shinobi presence around the young Jinchuriki. It made him wonder just how unstable the boy was if people weren't even willing to watch the village weapon. Uzumaki. Naruto gave a small inclination of his head as Gaara sat down opposite from him, maintaining about 5 meters between them. The atmosphere was slightly tense despite Naruto's warm smile and Gaara's contemplative silence. Both boys were wary of the other's power. Gaara. Again, there was silence as Naruto maintained his meditative pose and Gaara just stared at him. If the blonde wasn't so well controlled, he might have found it creepy. However, he knew Gaara was simply socially awkward through no fault of his own. Why did you ask the Kazekage about me? Naruto raised an eyebrow when Gaara did not refer to the man as his father, but considering how the man felt about his son, he should not have been all that surprised they didn't share a healthy father-son relationship. Because like I said, I want to understand you. Gaara narrowed his eyes. He obviously was not all that satisfied with the answer. What did you mean we share a burden? Naruto simply smiled amicably, but with his staff he began to draw out the kanji for 9 with his shikuju almost absently. Gaara just observed with his usual emotionless facade. However, the blonde did notice his eyes widen for just a fraction of a second. So that is why you are so powerful. Naruto gave a small chuckle, his eyes crinkling even more than they usually did. I know your ability to sense people's chakra through your sand. Did I use any that was not my own? To anybody outside the conversation the question would sound rather inane. Gaara simply stayed silent as he mulled that over. Then what is it? I have to know so that I can weigh your existence against my own. Naruto sighed as he stood to his feet, for once his face losing the slightly fake serene smile as he looked to the ground. I have already told you, Gaara, I am strong because I cannot afford not to be. There are people I find precious, and if I am unable to protect them, either by losing my life or being unable to find the peace that would bring them safety, then I have failed not only myself, but them as well. I hold their hopes on my shoulders right alongside my own, and it is a burden that I gladly carry, and would never allow to be dropped. Gaara continued to stare at him, the sand rising up around him to push him into a standing position. So, you fight for the people you care about, the people you love? The concept seemed alien to the redhead, even as he was saying it like he couldn't quite understand the concept. Well, Gaara? The Ichibi Jinchuriki looked up to see Naruto staring at him levelly, his staff in one hand with his other hanging loosely by his side. Do you intend to fight me? Naruto could already feel the sand beneath him begin to writhe. It seemed with Gaara's permission, or not, the bijou inside of him seemed incredibly eager to fight. And no. Even the way Gaara said that sounded unsure, as if he doubted his own voice. Naruto only offered him a small friendly smile as he once again returned to a seated position. Good. He could now see the intense emotions running through Gaara's mind as his emotionless mask dropped, shattered like his sand armor. It was obvious the boy felt incredibly conflicted, but Naruto couldn't be sure if that was within himself, or with his Bijuu. Every few moments or so he would grip his head as if in great pain, but it seemed he was fighting it, refusing the voice that had preyed on his fears and desires from a young age. "How would you like to sleep, Gaara?" The redhead suddenly looked up, surprise and shock now evident in his wide, bloodshot eyes. "That's right, isn't it? The voice keeps you awake?" Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly as he saw another flicker of emotion dance across the boy's face. "No, that's not it, you're afraid of falling asleep." Finally, the blonde understood as a sympathetic gleam reached his eyes, smiling sadly at his fellow Jinchuriki. "That's it though, isn't it? You aren't as uncaring as you try to appear. If you were, you would have no trouble with going to sleep and relinquishing control to the Ichibi." Naruto stood up and walked towards Gaara slowly, gently crouching down in front of the boy before placing a hand on his shoulder. Gaara saw it coming this time but still flinched at the contact he wasn't used to. "You still have the capacity to care about people, Gaara, love more than just yourself." The blonde sighed deeply as he once again rose to his full, if unimpressive height. "Remember, Gaara, if you live only for yourself, you will die by yourself." He offered out a hand towards his fellow container, who simply stared at the appendage, as if it were being offered by some incomprehensible alien life form. "You could find a way to let me sleep?" Naruto just gave one small smile as he closed the distance and clasped Gaara's hand in his own. "I promise, and I never go back on my promises." Gaara stared between him and the hand being offered before offering the first weak smile he had ever given since the death of his uncles. "Thank you, Uzum." He blinked suddenly before tightening his grip on the blonde's hand and staring into his eyes. "Thank you, Naruto." The blonde merely gave a foxy grin. Naruto quietly sat in his customary meditative position, his back leaned up against a tall tree in a clearing not too far from the edge of the forest he was in. It had been 6 days since his departure from Suna, and in that time he had crossed the deserts back towards Hai no Kuni before camping out in a forest on the border of Kaze no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. Currently he was unmoving, still to the world around him as his consciousness was elsewhere. "So my esteemed jailer returns, I had begun to thought you had forgotten me." The only response the giant fox received was a light chuckle and a small jingle that froze the Bijuu in place. "You say it like I could ever forget the very large and very angry fox in my stomach." The blonde cast a curious eye up the fox for a moment. "Speaking of which, did you get big dash?" "Cease your meaningless speech, Ninjin. Where did you get that staff?" As it spoke, the Kyuubi leaned down so its face was as close to the bars as it could get without pressing up against them. Naruto looked down at the staff, surprised for a moment that it had followed him into the seal. It had never done that before. Then again, it had become such an integral part of his day he shouldn't be too surprised, he almost always had it on hand now. It was a gift from Master Chikaku. Realization dawned across the blonde's features as he suddenly looked up at the Kyuubi with a smirk. "But you recognize it because it was the sage's, don't you?" He chuckled slightly to himself, at least it confirmed the validity of the temple's claims to its origins. The fox merely growled, a deep low sound that had Naruto's robes fluttering slightly in the breeze it created. "How dare you hold that staff so carelessly?" Naruto was actually a little frightened for once. The Kyuubi had always been menacing, but for the first time Naruto really felt the hatred coating his words, aimed directly at him. "How dare you lay a hand on anything he touched, Ninjin?" Naruto tried to remain calm against this new side of the Kyuubi, offering his usual serene smile, even though it was slightly strained. "You know it is unhealthy to hold on to the past so vehemently. It is better to cherish memories than cling to them desperately." The fox's great eyes narrowed very dangerously as its claws began scraping at the bars separating them. "Your preaching might work on Shikaku's container, but your meaningless words are nothing but wind in my ears." Naruto looked up, surprised at that while the fox returned to its somewhat normal, cold disposition, the staff forgotten for now. "Don't look so surprised, Ninjin. my chakra leaking into your frail body gives me a limited understanding of what is going on outside. I could feel that pitiful Tanuki's presence before you even saw that boy." Naruto reined in his shock for the moment. The Kyuubi's words at least made sense. "That's a strange way to address your kin." His response was a loud and rather vicious snort that made him crinkle his nose slightly. The Kyuubi had never been this close before, and up close his breath was not the most pleasant experience on Naruto's senses. "The rest of my kind are beneath my notice, barely worth the attention their meaningless existences bring." Naruto cocked his head at that, wondering how anybody could be so callous about family. "Maybe you should be glad you have family at all." Again, the fox grunted in his direction, baring his teeth to show his displeasure. "The moment I begin calling those weaklings my family is the moment I admit you are worthy of respect." From the tone of his voice, the Kyuubi obviously didn't think that was ever going to happen. Naruto just tapped the side of his head with the shakuju, causing the Kyuubi to flinch too subtly to see. "You know, behind bars like this you don't look all that powerful yourself, you know." The great fox stared at him with unblinking red eyes, his glistening white teeth showing as its lips pulled back. "I am a being far more powerful than you will ever hope to imagine. I am pure chakra-given consciousness, power incarnate." Naruto just grinned at the fox, causing it to stop its rant for a moment. "So, you really are just made of pure chakra? Good to know." And with that the blonde suddenly faded from the seal, the Kyuubi somehow feeling it had been played as it lay back down, not bothering to walk back into the darkness of the cell this time as a frown took up residence on its brow. Naruto cracked open his eyes just as somebody walked into the clearing, the ground at his feet twitching in a familiar way. "It's good to see you made it, Gaara." The redhead just had his usual emotionless mask on, which Naruto didn't mind. It would take more than a few days to give Gaara some semblance of normality. It was not all that difficult to leave the village. This time Naruto did raise an eyebrow. He knew Gaara was powerful, if not in general then at least for his age, but leaving a shinobi village should never be that simple. Of course, this was coming from the boy who actually walked straight out of Konoha. Sometimes he wondered just what those guards were doing that night. The village and its walls are built on and from sand. He offered no more for an explanation, so Naruto just shrugged. It hadn't taken all that much for Gaara to leave the village. He didn't particularly care for anything there. He had no relationships with his family, the people hated and feared him, and his own father had ordered his assassination countless times. For the sand-wielding Jinchuriki it hadn't even taken a second thought. Naruto remembered how Matsuri had been when he told the girl he was leaving. He had never seen a more heartbroken look before. She had actually offered to come with him, and honestly the blonde was touched. He was sure with enough time and planning he could have gotten the girl out of Suna, however she was in the academy. While not a shinobi yet, she would still be labeled as a missing nin due to her knowledge of certain key points about Suna's system and jutsu. Naruto didn't want her to have that kind of burden on her shoulders, so he simply told her that it was not the last time that they would see one another, and she should work on growing stronger in his absence. It had been a rather teary-eyed farewell from the cute brunette, but Naruto had promised he would see her again, and he had never broken a promise yet. He never did see Temari again though, which was a shame. Even so, he believed he would see her again too. Finally, he left his thoughts behind as he looked up at Gaara, his eyes twinkling at the challenge before him. "Alright Gaara, let's get started." That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.